If you're both armed only with baseball bats, slingshots, or this thing, you might still do some harm, but death is considerably less likely. That's assuming that they're going to come to your door with slingshots. Who is this idiot? Oh my God, I can't believe I missed that sentence when I read through this the first time. Holy cow. Who does he think's going to rob you? The little rascals?
Bringing you law, gospel, and guns. Welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio.
Welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio, a member of the Self-Defense Radio Network. I'm your host, Lloyd Bailey, the Armed Lutheran. And this is episode 47, brought to you by Cook's Holsters, American-made custom Kydex holsters with a lifetime warranty and a 100% satisfaction guarantee. CooksHolsters.com. If you like what you hear on today's program, we'd love to hear from you. Visit our feedback page at armedlutheran.us/feedback. Send us a voice message or an email, or drop us a voicemail at 888-571-5552. We'd love to respond to your comments and your questions on the air in a future episode. Welcome to the show. For those of you new to the show, Armed Lutheran Radio is about gun rights, the Second Amendment, the natural right of self-defense. We consider all those issues in light of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the cross, Jesus Christ, and Him crucified. How should we as Christians think about those issues? I'm joined by an awesome cast of competitive shooters, hunters, trainers, and clergy who will bring you commentary, tips, and reviews. And it's a great show that I think you're going to enjoy. I think it's different from anything you're going to hear anywhere else in the podcast space. And I appreciate you joining us this week. We've got a great show for you this week. But before we get started, a few announcements I wanted to get out of the way. First, the Armed Lutheran Shop is back online, just in time for Christmas. After a brief hiatus, I finally got the shop up and running again. There you can go and order Cook's Holsters, some cool Armed Lutheran gear, plus there's links to some affiliate shops like Amazon and Adams Arms and PowerTac USA. Go to the webpage, click on the Armed Lutheran Shop in the menu at the top of the page, or you can visit armedlutheran.us/store and do your shopping there. If you're planning on shopping Amazon for Christmas, by the way, which I am looking at a gigantic stack of Amazon packages sitting in front of me. Having moved to Texas and all my family being in North Carolina, we do a lot of shopping with Amazon. So we are, Armed Lutheran Radio is now an Amazon affiliate. So click on the Amazon banner on the website or go to armedlutheran.us/Amazon. That'll link your purchases to Armed Lutheran Radio. It's not going to cost you anything extra. Go ahead and do your shopping like you would normally do, but we'll get a little bit of a commission as a result. It'll help keep the lights on. We pay our hosting fees monthly, and we've got annual domain and website hosting fees coming soon. And your support helps keep things going here at Armed Lutheran Radio, and we'd really appreciate it. And speaking of Christmas, I can't believe that Christmas is right around the corner. Our 50th episode is going to drop on Christmas Day. November set another record for downloads, and thank you so much for your support. We really appreciate you downloading and subscribing to the podcast. Really glad that you enjoy what you hear here, and hope you will continue to listen in the future. We've got a special episode coming up next week. We've got some guests coming in to talk IDPA rules changes in 2017. Then we're back to regular programming for episode 49, and then I think for episode 50 on Christmas Day and episode 51, which will be the New Year's program, we'll probably do something a little different, have a little something special for you, so look forward to that in the coming weeks. And speaking of shopping for Christmas, by the way, and Cook's Holsters, if you're interested in getting a Cook's Holster in time for Christmas, There's a promo code at the Armed Lutheran shop. It's good for 15% off your order now through Christmas Day at the Armed Lutheran shop only. It's not good at cooksholsters.com. At cooksholsters.com, use the Armed Podcast promo code. That's good for 10% off, but you can get 15% off if you shop the Armed Lutheran shop and buy a Cook's holster there. But you better do it soon. They've been running about 2 weeks turnaround time lately. I got my new holster for my my new Ruger LCP2, and the turnaround was right at 2 weeks, and you got to also factor in shipping after that. So if you want to get your order in and have it in time for Christmas, do it now. Use the promo code COOKSCHRISTMAS when you do, and that'll get you 15% off your order. And again, that only works on the Armed Lutheran store. Don't use it at cooksholsters.com. If you go to cooksholsters.com, use the usual Armed Podcast promo code there to get 10% off directly from Cooks. All right, we've got a great show for you today. We've got tips from Sergeant Bill. We've got a self-defense tip from Aaron. We've got tips from Mia, and another great segment of Clinging to God and Guns with Pastor Bennett. So stick around. All that is coming your way next here on Armed Lutheran Radio.
A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed.
With those words, our founding fathers changed the world. They launched an experiment in freedom, where common lawful citizens are free to speak and gather and worship as they choose. But first among those freedoms is the one freedom that makes the rest possible. For 130 years, we've worked to preserve freedom first. I'm Wayne LaPierre of the National Rifle Association.
Pistols, prayer, and potluck. This is Armed Lutheran Radio.
Welcome back to Armed Lutheran Radio. Last week I mentioned, talked about a great way to get your kids involved in gun culture by taking them to a gun show. I talked about how I had taken my 6-year-old daughter Rylan with me to a gun show a few weeks back. And I also mentioned how on Black Friday I took my daughter to the range for the first time. Now she's 6, and like I said last week, she can be a little wild and rambunctious. She's a 6-year-old. And my wife wasn't really crazy about the idea. She was a little nervous about the idea of taking Rylan to the range. I started my son a little later, about 10 years old. So this had my wife a little worried. And I promised I was going to make sure everything was safe. And my wife was worried because we've all seen those videos, the tragic shootings at ranges where parents kind of let their kids go and weren't attentive enough, and people got shot and killed, people got injured. She envisioned, I think, that it would be like our range trips where she would come with me to the range and we were, walking around the range with guns and holsters and that sort of thing. She kind of pictured a 6-year-old walking around with a gun. So I assured her it was not going to be anything like that. So if you're thinking about taking your young son or daughter to the range and your spouse is a little nervous, how do you keep things safe? How do you assure your wife or your husband that things are going to be safe with your young child on the range? Well, I thought I would review that today and talk a little about that and talk about my experience with my daughter on Black Friday. First off, we piled everything in the car. We headed to the range, and as we were driving to the range, we spent the entire time talking about what to expect, what my expectations were, and what the rules of gun safety are. We didn't go through, I know there's lots and lots of rules. If you go to the website, you'll see that I've got as many as 10 rules listed, but we went through the top 4, right? All guns are always loaded was the big one. Keep your finger off the trigger. Don't point your gun at anything you don't intend to shoot, all that good stuff. So we reviewed the rules. I had her repeating them back to me, explaining why these rules were important, why you don't do this, why you don't do that. So some basic safety information before we got started. That was setting the stage for what we were going to be doing at the range. Once we got there, it was all about ear and eye protection to begin. And actually, we did this before we left the house. I made sure that I had eye protection and ear protection that fit her and worked. It was electronic ear protection. I wanted to make sure the batteries worked, and I wanted to make sure that they fit her head well and that it would protect her ears. In fact, what I did was I doubled up. I added the little squishy ear plugs underneath the Ear Pro, the electronic ear protection, just to make double sure. The next tip I would suggest is stick with small calibers to start. Right? Don't get out to the range and give them an AR-15. Don't get out to the range and give them a 30-06 or a 9mm even. Start out small with a .22 long rifle. Whether it's a rifle or a pistol, stick with a small caliber. You're going to have less recoil and you're going to have less noise that's going to frighten them or give them, to startle them and make this an uncomfortable experience. So stick with that. Start out, before you start shooting, showing them the controls with an unloaded gun. The time to show them how to operate the firearm is not when you've got a loaded magazine or a loaded chamber. Take the gun, basically do a little dry fire, essentially. Walk through how the gun operates, how to load it, how to aim it, explain how the sights work, go through pulling the trigger, show them how to grip it, where to put their finger on the trigger. Do all of that with an unloaded gun. Then, when it's time to load the gun, then you can, once they understand how the controls work, then you can start putting ammunition in. Stick with a bench to begin with. Don't start shooting freestyle. Stick with a stable platform. Whether you're going to shoot from a bench or maybe in a prone position or something like this, make sure it's something stable where you can more easily control the gun, and you don't have to worry about your child dropping the gun either. So a bench or a table is perfect with some sandbags or a tripod, something like this. Stay close to your child as they're shooting. Stay very close. Keep your hands near the weapon. If possible, for example, if it's a rifle, I would keep my hand on the weapon so that you can easily reassert control over the firearm if you worry that things are becoming unsafe. But if you do the next step, that shouldn't happen. So stay close. Don't be so concerned about taking pictures, okay, or video. Stay close to your child. If you want to take video, if you want to take pictures, take a tripod. Set up a tripod, do it that way. Don't step back to take pictures and video and leave your child alone with the firearm. Even if you're just steps away, that's far enough away that something bad could happen before you can reassert control of the firearm. Now, the next step, and I strongly recommend this one, no matter what you're doing, whether it's rifle or handgun, one round at a time. Whether it's a magazine, whether it's a bolt action rifle, whether it's the Marlin 60 with the tube like I was using, feed one round into the chamber, into the magazine at a time, let them shoot, and then repeat. That way you don't have to worry about them getting happy with the trigger and firing multiple shots. You don't have to worry about them firing the gun, getting scared, dropping it, and having it go off. If they're fearful, if they're nervous about doing it, about shooting the gun, don't push them. Be supportive. Be very calm about it. Don't pressure them into doing this if they're afraid. Show them how to shoot the gun. Do it yourself first. And say, hey, see, that wasn't so bad. That wasn't so loud. That wasn't so scary. You want to try? If you push because you want so badly for your child to be with you and to share with you this thing that you enjoy doing, you want them to enjoy it too. If you push and make that bad first impression, they may not want to come back. So make sure you're supportive and make sure you don't rush them. If they're not interested or if they're kind of scared or nervous, don't push. okay? Show them how much fun it is. Show them that it's not scary. I guarantee you they're going to come along, that they're going to want to do it. As long as you keep it safe and as long as you do what I suggested and you stick with a small caliber, you're going to be fine. They're going to want to do it and they're going to have a great time. And then when it's all said and done, when you want to go check your targets, make sure that the gun isn't unloaded. Share with your child in that safety checking of the gun as each time you shoot. Okay, hey, check the chamber for me. Is it empty? Yep, we're safe. Okay, we're clear. Then you can go down and check your targets. Don't ever let your child get in front of the gun. Don't let them get up and go down range until you have checked the chamber. You have both confirmed that the gun is empty. That way you're creating that routine that they know always to check and make sure the gun is clear before they move down range to check targets. Reinforce the rules of safety as you shoot and keep them involved as you go. Get them to help you set up the targets and set up the gear and bring it out of the car and then haul it back to your car. And then on the way back afterwards, reinforce the rules. Hey, you remember rule number 1? What's the first rule? What's the second rule? Why do we do this? Was that fun? Did you enjoy that? What was your favorite part? Keep them engaged and involved. And I did a little practice, and I actually got out and ran a figure 8 drill. And I had my daughter sitting in a chair behind me, calling out numbers as I shot. And she had a great time. She thought that was a lot of fun, trying to trip me up and call out numbers. And she giggled and laughed because she thought that was funny, as I was dancing around at her command, which she thought was funny. But at the end of it, she helped me pick up brass, and we made a game out of it. If she beat me and got more brass, she got ice cream on the way home. So keep it fun, keep it safe, and as you're doing it, here's another thing. If you do take pictures, when you're done, before you go home, send the pictures to your wife. Make sure that she knows that you guys are having a great time and that you're safe. And I guarantee you, if you follow these rules, if you follow these steps, you're going to have a safe, fun trip to the range that your kids will never forget, that you'll never forget, and your kids will really be looking forward to going back and doing again. I hope you get out and take your kids to the range and share that passion with them, just like I was talking about taking them to a gun show. Taking them to the range is the ultimate. Once they shoot a gun and you see that look on their face, I'll never forget the look on Ryland's face. I'll never forget the look on Reagan's face the first time they fired a gun. Their eyes lit up and they said, wow, that was fun. Once you do that, you'll make memories that will last a lifetime. So I hope you get out to the range with your kids, have a great time, be safe, and have fun.
Hi, I'm Paul Lathrop. I'd like to talk with you about the Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network. As many of you know, you'll likely have to win 2 fights if you have to use your gun in self-defense. The first fight is the gunfight itself. The second fight is the fight to clear your good name through the legal system. You don't need to draw your gun to find yourself in a legal battle for your life and freedom. Even if you do everything right, you may still be prosecuted, which could cost you tens of thousands of dollars. The Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network is an official sponsor of the Self-Defense Radio Network, and they will completely take that worry away by giving you financial assistance and legal assistance if you have to use your gun in a legitimate self-defense situation. In my case, it was $12,500 just to get out of jail and get the attorney started. Don't let an overzealous anti-gun prosecutor make your life miserable because you chose to legally defend yourself. Sign up at armedcitizensnetwork.org for only $135 for the first year and discounted renewals. Or you can call 360-978-5200 and just tell them Paul sent you.
Up next, it's Mia's Motivations with Mia Anstine.
Hi everybody, today I want to share another story with you, and this one is about one of my very best friends who I met in college. She messaged me the other day asking for advice in regard to purchasing her first gun for concealed carry. Some people had told her that she has to have a revolver because she would not be able to pull back the slide on a semi-auto handgun. Still other people told her that she needed the semi-automatic because it's easier to shoot. She wanted to know my opinion regarding the matter. She is a really tiny person and she has small hands, so I wanted to delve further into this topic. It's one that I am continually asked at firearms classes, and as a matter of fact, a lot of my friends who teach classes are asked this question as well. And it's not just what type of handgun should I buy, it's also what is better, the revolver or the semi-auto. And quite honestly, that debate has been going on for years. But I wanted to address her question and try to help her decide. Looking at these, some of the primary differences in semi-autos and revolvers are, of course, the operation. Some notable differences are the moving slide versus the rotating cylinder. And there are those people that like the semi-automatic because they say you can carry more rounds in it. The number of rounds varies depending on the caliber, the make, and the model. For example, you can purchase a .357 semi-auto. Take the Glock G3, for example. It holds 15 rounds, whereas you can look at a revolver of the same caliber, say the Kimber K6S. It holds 6 rounds. So there's quite a difference there. The .357, it's not as common as it once was, but I wanted to mention it because thanks to my friend Paul Glasgow at Legally Armed America, I am currently reviewing the K6S. And it's an absolute favorite that I found during range day at SHOT Show last year. So I'll be sharing more about that in the future. In the meantime, let's get back to my friend's little hands and some of the key things that she should address in choosing a handgun. And these aspects may help you in choosing a carry model as well. If you're going to be carrying the gun, there is always the issue of where you intend to carry it. This is a concern for everyone, but it seems to be of added significance for women. It sounds simple to just carry it in a handbag, but I suggest that you carry it on your body so you are in command of it at all times. In comparing the semi-autos and revolvers again, some semi-autos are hammerless and others have an exposed hammer. The same goes for the wheel guns, aka the revolver. This is a feature that you need to look at because the smoother the exterior surface features are on the gun, the easier it will be to produce when you're under pressure. You won't have to worry much about the hammer snagging on your clothing or layers or getting hung up in a purse. And when you're trying to produce a firearm quickly and you're looking at the number of rounds that a firearm holds, reloading quickly becomes a concern. Rapid reloads are possible with both the revolver and the semi-auto, provided that you have speed load clips ready for the revolver and magazines filled for the semi-auto. Once you go beyond that, operating a revolver can be rather simple. However, the trigger pull can be cumbersome on some of the double action models. When you're pulling the trigger, you're producing the two methods of action. You're cocking it as well as firing, and that can be difficult sometimes in some of those guns. This K6S that I mentioned before, it has a match grade trigger which allows me, a small woman, to pull the trigger and shoot one-handed and keep my sights on target, and that is an excellent quality. When you're looking at a semi-auto, operating the slide is a concern that some people address. This can become a breeze once you learn to do it properly. And yes, there is a right and wrong way to do it. Once you learn to do it properly, it is simple, and if you practice regularly, you will have no problems at all. There are plenty of handguns that will fit little hands. The thing is, if you can get to the range and shoot a variety of models, that is ideal because your small hand is going to fit differently than, say, my small hand around the grip of a gun. While you're at the range, you should also see about trying a variety of calibers. For example, I like a .45 caliber, but my friend Ann likes a 9mm, and then Becky, she likes a micro carry .380. And those are easy to conceal, but they may feel a little different in your hand. So if you can put live rounds downrange, you'll be able to decide what you like. So you see, there's a lot to consider, but the main thing is that you get your hands around the guns and see what fits you. I suggest finding a class where you can shoot maybe some of the instructor's firearms, or chat with your friends and invite several of them to the range and see if you can demo what they have. Find out what you like, and once you decide to take the step in purchasing that firearm, remember to practice regularly and always be safe.
You can read more from Mia and watch her YouTube videos at miaanstine.com.
Okay, you have your concealed carry license, but you and I both know that's definitely not training. Do you have the ability to carry your gun comfortably, draw safely, and get at least 2 shots on target quickly? How about shooting on the move, engaging multiple bad guys, and shooting one-handed? These are real-world scenarios you don't get to practice in your concealed carry class or at a public shooting range. If you feel you need to sharpen these types of skills, let me invite you to take the Beyond Concealed Carry training with Bob Main of the Handgun World podcast and Ben Branham of the Modern Self-Protection podcast. Bob and Ben have been training people to defend themselves with a handgun for the past 4 years in cities throughout the United States. Self-Defense Radio Network listeners get a $25 discount off the class tuition and $15 discount on the supporting videos on the Shooters Club website. They might be teaching in a city near you in 2017. Just visit the listener discount page at www.selfdefenseradio.net to sign up and use the password SDRN, that's all lowercase by the way, to get these discounts.
Bringing you law, gospel, and guns. You're listening to Armed Lutheran Radio. Time now for another Ballistic Minute with Sergeant Bill Silvia.
Hey, I'm Sergeant Bill, and this is your Ballistic Minute. Today we're going to revisit zeroing your pistol. Now, most factory sites on major manufacturers, pistols are all zeroed at about 10 yards. You may have noticed that when you're trying to shoot any kind of target at about 20 yards or so, that you're not getting point of aim, point of impact. You're probably hitting low. So what you need to do is either adjust your point of aim at distant targets, or what I've been trying to do is either get a new front sight that will adjust your point of aim and point of impact, or get an adjustable sight set. I know that the last year or so I've been working on trying to increase my accuracy, and it's pretty frustrating when I can shoot at 5 or 10 yards a really small group, but it seems like I don't have that accuracy at 20 yards. Well, turns out my gun's not zeroed at 20 yards, it's zeroed at 10. So, new sights will fix that. Remember, if you're zeroed at 20 yards with your handgun, at 10 yards, you're going to be shooting a little bit off that point of aim, point of impact, but it's not going to be that much of a deal. If you're zeroed at 10 yards, your point of aim and your point of impact can be about 4 inches apart. And at distant targets, if you're shooting a mini popper or a headshot, that can be a big problem. Or you can hit a non-threat. This has been your Ballistic Minute with Sergeant Bill.
Sergeant Bill Silvia is a 15-year veteran of the Dallas Police Department and masterclass competitive shooter. You can watch Sergeant Bill's shooting videos at armedlutheran.us/Sergeant Bill.
It's the Bill of Rights, not the Bill of Needs. I'm Alan Gottlieb, founder of the Second Amendment Foundation. When someone says we don't need that kind of gun, remind them the Founding Fathers determined what rights our Constitution should protect. There's a world of difference between rights and needs. It is not the function of government to tell us what we need or what we don't. Certainly no one needs an assault rifle or a Saturday night special, or for that matter, no one needs a Corvette with a high-capacity horsepower engine capable of speeds to 150 miles per hour. But in the hands of honest, responsible individuals, we have the right of choice. We have the right to read books others don't like. We have the right to listen to any radio program we choose. We have the right to dress the way we want to. We also have the right to own firearms of our choice. So the next time someone tells you you don't need something, tell them it's the Bill of Rights, not the Bill of Needs. Join the Second Amendment Foundation today so that this message and our Bill of Rights might live. Call 425-4 425-454-7012. That's 425-454-7012.
Where gun culture meets the gospel. This is Armed Lutheran Radio. It's time for this week's self-defense tip from Aaron Israel of Fundamental Defense.
Hey folks, this is Aaron Israel with Fundamental Defense, here with your personal defense tip of the week. This week I want to share a personal anecdote with you and what it taught me about home defense fundamentals. My last job when I was in the Army was to be the rear detachment commander, which is the commander for all of the soldiers who have to stay back from a deployment overseas because they have medical issues or legal issues or some combination thereof, and that makes them not able to go to Afghanistan or Iraq. And so one of my secondary jobs was taking care of the spouses of the soldiers who were deployed and making sure that they had access to medical care, making sure they had access to all the resources on post, and that they had timely information about what was going on with their soldiers overseas and when R&R was and all that sort of thing. So I had a lot of interaction with the spouses of a lot of my peers who went overseas on this deployment. One night, I get a call from one of the spouses, actually my wife does, and says, hey, get over here quick. I've just had my door kicked in, and I need somebody to come over here and help me. So we jump in the truck, and we head across town. It's about probably a 5-minute drive from where we lived is where she was at. And we get there, and we see that her entire door frame is smashed in, the door's off the hinges, and she's in the house just kind of in shock at what had just happened. So I sit her down, and I debrief her, and she says, hey, I was sitting here, I'd already put the kids to bed, this is probably 9 o'clock at night or so, and she's reading a book, and she hears somebody start kicking on the door. And as they're kicking in the door, she goes into the back room and retrieves a revolver, which is actually unloaded, and she has time to put 3 or 4 bullets into the revolver, and it has the crimson trace grips on it. When she comes around the corner, the laser shines on the wall as she's moving the gun to extension, and these 2 bad guys, these 2 thugs who had kicked in her door, see the laser, see the gun, and they turn tail and run out of the house. So that was a good defensive gun use there. But there's a lot of things that we can learn from her situation. And when I walked outside after the situation took place and I walk around the house, and I noticed that first thing is that her grass hadn't been cut. So her grass is real long. Her husband's been away on deployment. This is probably 4 or 5 months into that deployment, and she hadn't been taking care of her lawn. So her grass is unkept. The hedges are all out of control, blocking the windows, and it just looks like nobody's living in the house. And then her husband's truck that he's obviously not driving has been sitting parked in the same spot such that there's oil spots underneath it, and it obviously hasn't moved in a long time. Which, if I'm a criminal casing a neighborhood, that tells me that the man of the house is not home. And when the man of the house isn't home, I know that I've got a deployed soldier's wife there and kids, or maybe just the soldier's wife. So that's an easy target for me. That's a soft target if I'm a criminal looking to do harm. Now, we don't know why the guys kicked in her door. They may have just been there to rob the place, or they may have had other more nefarious intentions in mind, and it could have gone really poorly for her. Thank God she was able to have that gun and scare them off with that defensive gun use without having to fire a shot. But the second thing I noticed is that her door, like most doors on houses that are built by these Syntex type companies that build the cookie cutter houses, they put the little bitty screws into the deadbolt backstop, and they put the little bitty screws into the deadbolt itself such that it just barely secures those things. And so with one good hard kick close to the doorknob, you can bust the deadbolt right off and take the whole door frame with it. So when you're installing a door and a door frame, you want to use those big 3-inch type bolts and put those suckers all the way into the studs so that when you kick it, you have to kick it 5 or 6 times, hopefully, to get it to come off the hinges, and it's not going to take the door frame with it. That's a simple home defense upgrade that you can go to Home Depot and make happen today without having to spend any money on an expensive security system or anything. If you make your door harder to kick down, then you've made yourself way safer than if you just have those cheap, junky screws that they put in when they build your house trying to do it in a hurry. So, things we can learn from that. Keep your yard cleaned up, even if your husband or wife is out of town for a long time, especially if you're in the military. I used to give this talk a lot when I was in command. after this happened, keep your yard looking clean. Keep the vehicles rotated. Don't make it look like your house is not taken care of, because that tells criminals that you're an easy target, especially if you're in the military or if they're casing the neighborhood and they notice that your husband's gone a lot on work. This makes women especially vulnerable if you're there during the day. So do not let your yard get out of shape just because you don't have someone there to take care of it for you. If you got to find somebody to mow your lawn, I'm sure you can get with your local community and church groups and that sort of thing and make it happen even if you can't afford it. So don't let your yard go unkept. Keep those vehicles rotated and don't make your house look like an obvious target. Do those upgrades on your door. Make that Home Depot upgrade to the bolts. And then the last thing that you can learn from this situation is, I mentioned that she had to load her pistol. She had to go into the other room, grab her revolver, and actually physically load it before she was ready to defend herself. So think about where you're staging your defensive firearms. If you're spending a lot of time in the living room or the dining room, which is the general area where she was sitting reading her book, and you have defensive firearms and it's nighttime, it stands to reason that you have a quick access safe in that room with you so that you can have access to those loaded firearms ready to go if this situation takes place. We have a tendency to just stage our firearms in our bedroom because we assume that it's going to be the middle of the night and we're going to be asleep when these bad things happen. Well, not necessarily. There's video of people breaking in during broad daylight, or it can be earlier in the evening, 9 o'clock, like it was for my friend back in the military. So make sure you stage your defensive tools where you're spending your time. If you're in a room and you're spending a lot of time in there and you have guns for personal defense, it stands to reason that you would have a gun staged somewhere in that room. And the good thing about those little safes is you can move them around from room to room. So you don't have to buy a whole bunch of them. You can just move it into the room. When I go into the office, I move my quick access safe into the office. And when I go to bed, I move it back into the bedroom. So that's an option for you if you don't want to buy several of them. But those are some very quick and easy tips that you can do to prepare yourself for a home invasion. So don't let your house look unkept. Keep your bushes trimmed. Keep your yard clean. Keep it mowed. Keep those vehicles driven. Make them look like they're driven. And then upgrade your personal security door. Make sure that you got those 3-inch bolts in it and those good solid deadbolts so that it's not easy to kick in. And then make sure you stage your defensive firearms where you're spending most of your time. That's your personal defense tip of the week. Thanks for tuning in.
Aaron Israel is a Personal Defense Network contributor and owner of Fundamental Defense. You can find out more and sign up for any of Aaron's classes at fundamentaldefense.com.
Do you carry a gun for personal protection? I do. What kind of a holster do you use? When I started out, I had no idea what I was doing. You've got to get a good holster. First and foremost, you got the gun, you got to get something good to carry it in. Well, I had no idea what that meant until I found Cook's Holsters at cooksholsters.com. Try the inside the waistband holster with an adjustable clip. I've carried that one for years. They've also got another one, the Comfort Series holster that can be worn inside or outside the waistband. I've got both of them for several of my guns. They're the most comfortable holsters I've ever owned. Available in lots of colors, including custom printed Kydex. Cook's holsters are made in the USA in the great state of Georgia. They come with a 100% lifetime warranty against defects and a 100% satisfaction guarantee. Visit Cook's Holsters at www.cooksholsters.com. Be sure to use the promo code ARMEDPODCAST and you'll get a 15% discount on everything in the store. You put a lot of money into the gun you choose to carry, right? Every day you put that gun on, make sure you're putting it into the best holster available. cooksholsters.com.
Up next, we're Clinging to God and Guns with Pastor John Bennett.
Welcome back to Armed Lutheran Radio. Time now for another episode of Clinging to God and Guns with our good friend Pastor John Bennett. Pastor, welcome back.
Thank you, Lloyd.
And this week we've got an article from the Washington Post back in January of 2013. This one from Lisa Miller, who is apparently, or has been, a senior editor at Newsweek, the Wall Street Journal, the New Yorker. She is described as from what I can find out about her, a secular Jew who married into apparently an interfaith family in a ceremony at in an Episcopal church, and now worships at a Jewish temple which she describes as progressive and inclusive. So that should give you some idea of where this is headed.
Right, so it's not necessarily Jewish as opposed to
no.
Liberal politics is the religion there, and it's interesting because not too long ago we went over an article that was written by a Brit lecturing Christians in America how we ought to regard guns, and now we have a secular Jew, which is, most secular Jews are actually atheists. It's more of a cultural thing. Yeah, so now we have a liberal secular Jew lecturing Christians how we ought to regard guns. And the thing that's deeply ironic about that is that, she talks about Jesus and how Jesus would feel about these kinds of things. And being a secular Jew, she doesn't even believe in him.
Yep, that's rather ironic. So here we go.
Yes, it is.
According to this is January of 2013, so this is a month after Newtown.
Right.
According to the startling results of a survey released by the Public Religion Research Institute, 57% of white evangelicals live in homes where someone owns a gun, compared, for example, with 31% of Catholics. I'm not sure why that's startling, but even more startling, even after 20 first graders were slaughtered in Connecticut at the hands of a madman with an assault rifle, 59% of white evangelicals continue to oppose tighter restrictions on gun laws.
I don't doubt the data here, but her conclusion's all wrong. It would seem she's inferring that there's something wrong with evangelicals in the way that they think because, there's such a significantly higher number of evangelicals who are gun owners as opposed to Catholics. But what the data actually demonstrates here is the political leanings of those who identify as either evangelical or Catholic. And just that was my suspicion at first, and just out of curiosity, I found a Pew Research poll, and those numbers that she gives, 57% of white evangelicals and 31% of Catholics, those numbers are very close to the percentages of those demographics that identify as politically conservative. So there's not something wrong with evangelicals versus Catholics. Evangelicals just tend to be a whole lot more conservative than Roman Catholics.
An obvious question occurs in light of these results. How do such Christians reconcile? You almost expect her to put quotes, air quotes, around Christians, don't you?
If that's the case, maybe we can put air quotes around the term journalist for her.
Right. How do such Christians reconcile their stalwart commitment to the Second Amendment with their belief in a gospel that preaches nonviolence? The Christian Lord allowed himself to be crucified rather than fight the injustice of the death sentence imposed on him. Quote, "If someone strikes you on the cheek, turn to him the other also," he says in the Gospel of Matthew. The Bible is mute on the matter of guns, of course, but it is impossible to imagine that Jesus would find anything good to say about them. Wow, she packed two pieces of Bible interpretation, really bad ones, and a bit of her own opinion into that paragraph. So let's unpack that.
Well, she's talking about the injustice of the death sentence imposed on Jesus, and I don't want to point the finger, but since she is a secular Jew, it was her people that did that. But anyway, if she wants to preach about injustice,
this is
ironic there.
Yeah, this is that common refrain that we hear over and over and over again, that Jesus allowed himself to be crucified rather than resist. We've heard this one lots of times, right?
I hate this argument. It's absolutely moronic. The only thing that it demonstrates when people argue this way is that they are incredibly ignorant to biblical theology. We've debunked this time and time before, but Jesus did not resist because he was willingly going to the cross to redeem us. Yes, he was victimized by the Jews, but, as he said to Peter, I could at any time call down legions of angels to fight for me. It wasn't like he was some powerless guy who was absolute pacifist and just walked into the arms of death because, that's what he was resolved to do, and he was so violently opposed to violence. Does that make sense? Violently opposed to, I don't know. But he didn't do this because he was, a nonviolent pacifist. He did this for our salvation. But, she, I hate this. This is so condescending. An obvious question occurs in light of these results. It seems these kinds of questions are only obvious to liberals.
To those who don't know anything about
she says, she gives this notion that it's impossible to imagine that Jesus would have had anything good to say about guns. This is one of those classic projection of liberals where they try to make Jesus agree with them. Jesus didn't have an aversion to the ownership of defensive sidearms, and he even encouraged it, as we see in Luke 22. Jesus was all about proclaiming the kingdom of heaven. He wasn't about political advocacy, and he sure as shooting wasn't a social justice warrior.
So how about this turn the other cheek thing that we often hear? Does Jesus really call on us to lay down and take it if we're attacked by muggers, rapists, and lunatics like the guy at Newtown?
Well, let's take a look at the context for that. It comes out of Matthew chapter 5, starting with verse 38, and this is part of the Sermon on the Mount. And Jesus says, "You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. But if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if anyone would sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse the one who would borrow from you." Now on the surface, and of course liberals like to take this passage out of context, they want to say, see, here, you have to be a pacifist. You have to embrace nonviolence. Jesus' words do not negate self-defense. We're not talking about lethal force here. We're not talking about somebody threatening our lives. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. If somebody is going to insult you, which, looking at the cultural context of that, to slap someone upside the face was more of a public insult. You can think of, the old-fashioned movies of medieval times where someone takes a glove and slaps a guy in the face, and that was more or less a challenge to a duel. That's kind of what's going on here, that Jesus is talking about public insult. And when we take a look at the whole concept of self-defense with a firearm, it's about meeting with equal force as the threat is appropriate for the threat. So, yeah, the appropriate response for somebody slapping you in the face isn't to shoot them. Right. And so, but that seems to be the application that they make, is that, well, because Jesus said turn the other cheek, if somebody is seeking to take your life, you should just roll over and take it.
With the Newtown tragedy so fresh and its victims so innocent, conservative Christian leaders are not falling over themselves to proclaim in public their pro-gun theologies. Nevertheless,
that's not really the purpose of...
That's I started to say. I missed that the first time. Our theologies aren't pro-gun.
Our theology isn't about guns. It's about Christ and the cross.
Nevertheless, such arguments do exist. I will address some of them, moving generally from unpersuasive credos to more convincing assertions of individual rights and responsibilities. She basically lists out some different arguments in favor of guns that Christians make, and then at the end just basically says they're all provocative but unconvincing. So here we go. The Second Amendment is approved by God. This, at least, appears to be the argument on the homepage of the Christian Gun Owner website. It goes like this: the authors of the Constitution were acting under the guidance of God, therefore the Constitution is itself inspired by God. This argument is a subset of the bigger American exceptionalism worldview. God has special things in store for this country, and its founding documents bear the imprint of that specialness.
Now, this is pretty interesting because I'm looking at the Christian Gun Owner website, and that's actually what they do argue, which I would say is wrong. It's wrong to argue this way.
Right.
So, I would say that, in all fairness, she does have a point in bringing up this argument. We need to, and I mentioned this the last time we went through a segment, that we need to have a quote-unquote new separation of church and state. The purpose of the church is not to become a realm of political advocacy. Now, certainly when it comes to issues such as the right to life, yes, the church should be involved in that because that is a universal moral issue that affects all people.
Right.
But to say that the Second Amendment is approved by God because the framers are acting under the guidance of God is not the right approach to take. And that isn't to say, though, that there can't be arguments made from a biblical perspective, as we have done here, regarding the rights to personal ownership. It all falls under the realm of personal freedom under the gospel, as well as looking at Romans 13. The government permits us to own firearms, so there's nothing wrong with doing that, because firearms in and of themselves aren't a moral evil.
The next point is only prayer can conquer gun violence. This is Texas Governor Rick Perry's view. Evil is the source of violence in America, not guns. Quote, laws, the only redoubt of secularism, will not suffice, Perry has said. Let us all return to our places of worship and pray for help. End quote. This couldn't be called an argument, really. It's more like hope. It's funny she would mention...
So why did she list it?
Right. It's funny she would mention hope when I can pretty much guess who she voted for on the basis of hope in 2008 and 2012.
Right. And Rick Perry is dead on about this, that we look at how laws have failed to prevent gun violence. And, there could even be the argument made that there are cases where the laws have actually enabled gun violence to take place because someone who was restricted from getting a firearm because of wait periods and so forth was killed because of that. We do have cases, legitimate cases, that demonstrate that. But it's true. This is a heart problem. This is a problem of sin. This is a problem of evil. You're not going to stop the problem by legislating it away. Murder is already illegal. So why is going to be making it harder to own firearms, how is that going to make murder any less or any more illegal than it already is?
The next argument is don't blame guns, blame a corrupt society. In this version, conservative Christians blame increasing gun violence on what they call, quote, secular values, which is to say the legalization of abortion, the growth of single-parent families, same-sex marriage, and so on. These values, legal abortion in particular, have led mainstream culture to devalue life. Quote, I pray that the Newtown tragedy will cause the nation's cultural gatekeepers to turn to God as our only hope, wrote Joseph Matera, presiding bishop of the Christ Covenant Coalition, in Charisma magazine. I have no idea who that is. But in the absence of that revival, carrying a gun is every citizen's right.
I haven't heard this argument before. Most people that I hear an argument as to explaining the reality of gun violence, that it is, as I said just earlier, it is a sin problem.
It's sort of a subset of the previous point, which is it's a decline of our values as a country. I see that. I can see that argument, I think, but I don't see that as being the main argument. The next point she makes, or she brings up, curbing gun ownership is the gateway to curbing other rights. Quote, there's a suspicion of a too powerful state, Russell Moore, president of the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, told me. Sometimes one will hear that if the government has too much power over guns, it will also have too much power over freedom of speech, freedom of religion. The minute the state starts dictating the kinds of guns a citizen can own, this argument continues. It has gone over the line. Moore himself is not opposed to universal background checks and emphasizes that on the matter of gun control, believing Christians can disagree.
This is another argument, and she's listing these arguments as somehow being unconvincing. But there's a lot to say to this, because if your government possesses the authority to negate your constitutionally guaranteed rights, where does it stop at your gun rights? We see right now that it's already happening to our First Amendment rights as well with the exercise of religion. Mm-hmm. In some ways, free speech is being attacked as well. You have liberal politicians. We've heard the whole fairness doctrine thing when it comes to talk radio. Of course, they don't want any fairness doctrine when it comes to broadcast media or print media, but they only want to use it to attack radio. Mm-hmm. That they want to limit speech. They want to be the ones in control of what can and cannot be said.
Right, and the rise of safe spaces and trigger warnings and all of that stuff is just an encroachment on free speech, and we see this growing more and more. And without the Second Amendment, we have no protection for all the other freedoms that the Bill of Rights defines.
Absolutely, and that's why it's often referred to by gun rights advocates as the first freedom. Without that freedom, the government can do whatever it wants to you.
Yes, and Moore is correct in this last sentence. She points out that in the matter of gun control, believing Christians can disagree, and that's absolutely correct. We can agree. There is no Christian position on gun control, and this is why, for example, the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod has no official position on gun control. It's adiaphora. It is right. Not forbidden or specifically or commanded in the Bible, and therefore we take no position on it.
Right.
The next point, self-defense and love and defense of neighbor are biblical values. This is how former Southern Baptist Convention and official Richard Land, in an interview on National Public Radio in December of 2012, defended his support for arming teachers. A similar argument was put forth by David French, senior counsel for the American Center for Law and Justice, in an article in Patheos several months ago. Going back to Noah through Exodus and the prophets, French builds his case, and he concludes with the moral philosopher John Locke, who called the right of self-defense a fundamental law of nature. The defense of self, the defense of others, is not only biblically authorized, but in certain circumstances is a moral imperative, French told me. Turn the other cheek does not mean turn your wife's cheek or turn your children's cheek. Gun control, he wrote in Patheos, is the state's effort to deprive humans of their God-given right to self-defense.
Absolutely. Making the argument from Scripture for defending the life of your neighbor is certainly a valid one. We even look at, for example, in the Small Catechism, that in regards to the fifth commandment, that we are to defend our neighbor. In regards to the seventh commandment, we are to help our neighbor in defending his property. And one thing that most of these gun control advocates don't think about is that for the perfect stranger who steps between violence and the innocent, that is an act of love. They put themselves in harm's way. In those instances, they are taking more regard for the life of others than for their own life.
If we turn to the large catechism, there's a couple of places that are instructive. Therefore, God rightly calls these persons murderers who fail to give counsel and aid to those who are in need and in peril of body and life. For although you did not physically perform these criminal acts, nevertheless, as far as you were concerned, you let your neighbor remain stuck in his misfortune until he perished. This is the same as if I were to see someone struggling in deep water or fallen into fire, and yet would not reach out my hand to him to pull him out and save him. Would not all the world recognize me as nothing but a scoundrel and a murderer?
Yeah. We go to the example of the parable of the Good Samaritan, that the grave sinners in that were not only those who were robbing the poor guy, but the scribe and the priest who passed by on the other side. Mm-hmm. Luther also says here, if you see anyone innocently sentenced to death or in similar distress, and do not save him, although you know ways and means to do so, you have killed him. Doing nothing is to be complicit in death if we are in a position to render aid. So pacifism, in essence, pacifism is a sin against the fifth commandment.
And yet, Miss Miller says these arguments are provocative but unconvincing. Jesus identified with the weak, she says, not the strong, with the victims, not the shooters, or the people with guns. More than 500 children were killed in accidental gun deaths in 2011.
Oh boy. This whole phrase that Jesus identified with the weak and not the strong, with the victims, not the shooters, or the people with guns, it's a bit troubling. It's troubling because this kind of language, it makes Jesus out to be some sort of social justice warrior, which I'm sure fits right alongside with the mindset of your modern liberal, or in this case, your secular Jew. The truth is that Jesus identified with sinners. Mm-hmm. He took upon himself the sin of the world. He took upon himself our sin. He became sin in our place. He stood condemned for us so that he could open the kingdom of heaven to all who believe through the sacrifice of his blood on Calvary's cross. So again, the author is trying to make Jesus agree with her. This entire argument is just so terribly flawed. It demonstrates a complete ignorance in biblical theology.
When she says that Jesus didn't identify with the shooters or the people with the guns, she puts that in parentheses. What she's doing is she's lumping honest, law-abiding gun owners who just want to protect themselves and their families with criminals, murderers, and psychopaths. We're no different.
You're right. I didn't catch that at first. So she's demonizing lawful gun owners with those who use guns for violence.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, goodness. Well, let's just assume for a second that this is a reasonable argument, though. It's not, but let's just pretend. It's still a false argument. To say that Jesus would not have identified with, quote-unquote, the people with the guns, this blatantly flies in the face of what's written in Luke 22. And we don't have to parse that text because we've done that time and time again, and I'm sure your audience practically has that passage memorized because of the times we've gone over it. But in that text, Jesus is admonishing his disciples to arm themselves with what was the standard sidearm of the day.
Right.
So this notion is just completely false. But where I really take issue with what she says is her blatant dishonesty. She claims that more than 500 children were killed in accidental gun deaths in 2011. That's a flat-out lie. Just the last segment that we did, we looked at the statistics, and in 2010, there was 62 children ages 14 and under that were killed by accidental shootings. You know, we're not trying to diminish the tragedy of a parent losing their child in such a horrific way. I couldn't even imagine the kind of pain with that. The argument that's presented here is that we need more gun control because of 62 children. I mean, even if we took the very false, dishonest number that she puts out here of 500, that would be 1.5 millionth of 1% of the population.
So she concludes with this.
Sad.
As the Reverend Gary Hall preached at Washington National Cathedral, if we want to stand with Jesus and Martin Luther King, we've also got to stand with those who, like them, die by means of violence. That may sound like a hard truth, but for a Christian, there's no way around it. Final thoughts?
This was a terrible article. What do you expect, though, coming out of the Washington compost?
Yeah. It's another example, right, of, like you have always said, it's another example of trying to take their politics and sprinkle Jesus on it,
right,
and make Jesus agree with them.
Jesus said, love your neighbor, so you must be willing to let them kill you if it pleases them. And I'm not saying that, I say that jokingly, but the sad truth is that that's the logical conclusion of their arguments.
Right.
So, the only thing that I would add is that it's not the place of a liberal secular Jews to lecture Christians regarding their own theology.
Yep.
If you're a secular Jew, you have enough problems with your own theology to start with.
Right. Well, thank you for joining us, Pastor. It's been a pleasure. I appreciate you taking the time.
Absolutely. It's always a good time.
And thank you all for joining us for another episode of Clinging to God and Guns here on Armed Lutheran Radio.
John Bennett is the pastor at St. John's Lutheran Church in Willow Creek, Minnesota. For more information, visit stjohnswillowcreek.org.
And that's going to wrap it up for another episode of Armed Lutheran Radio. Thank you to my wonderful cast of co-hosts, Sergeant Bill Silvia, Aaron Israel, Mia Anstine, and of course, Pastor John Bennett. Thank you, dear listener, for joining us and downloading and subscribing. Thank you for another great month as we set records again in November. Be sure to tune in next week. Got a special episode coming for you where we got another Shooters Roundtable coming next week to talk about the 2017 IDPA rulebook. We've got 3 of our guests from the previous roundtable joining us, plus a special guest who is also going to be with us for what should be an interesting show. I think you'll enjoy it. Hope you'll join us again next week. Until then, keep shooting, keep praying. We'll talk to you next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Armed Lutheran Radio. For show notes, be sure to visit our website at www.armedlutheran.us. You can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, and TuneIn. This podcast is made possible by Cook's Holsters and contributions from listeners like you.